This book was gifted to me when I was a baby. It is the Grimm's Fairy Tales. So very, very classic fairy tale stories. And it says, to Lauren from Aunt Cheryl and Uncle Dean, which I do not have an Aunt Cheryl and Uncle Dean, which makes me think I was a baby when this is gifted to me, because I have no idea who those people are. But I can remember my dad reading me these stories when I was younger. He would always read them to me when I was going to sleep. So that is what I am going to be doing for you today. I just haven't picked out which one I want to read just yet. So we can do that together. Actually, I'm really curious what the copyright is of this book. So the copyright of this book is from 1945, but the printing was in 1995, which was the year I was born. There are a lot of stories in here, and very, very famous ones. For example, there is Rapunzel, Cinderella, Rumpelstiltskin, and others like that. Okay, so I just flipped through randomly and I landed on Rapunzel. So we are going to read Rapunzel. There was once a man and his wife who had long wished in vain for a child, and at last they had reason to hope that heaven would grant their wish. There was a little window at the back of their house, which overlooked a beautiful garden full of lovely flowers and shrubs. It was, however, surrounded by a high wall, and nobody dared to enter it, because it belonged to a powerful witch who was feared by everybody. One day, the woman, standing at the window and looking into the garden, saw a bed planted with beautiful rampion. It looked so fresh and green that she longed to eat some. This longing increased every day, and as she knew it could never be satisfied, she began to look pale and miserable and to pine away. Then her husband was alarmed and said, "What ails you, my dear wife?" "Alas," she answered, "if I cannot get any of the rampion to eat from the garden behind our house, I shall die." Her husband, who loved her, thought, "Before you let your wife die, you must fetch her some of that rampion, cost what it may." So in the twilight, he climbed over the wall into the witch's garden, hastily picked a handful of rampion, and took it back to his wife. She immediately prepared it and ate it very eagerly. I've never heard of rampion, so I really hope I am pronouncing that right. It was so very, very nice that day. Her longing for it increased threefold. She could have no peace unless her husband fetched her some more. So in the twilight he set out again, but when he got over the wall, he was terrified to see the witch before him. "How dare you come into my garden like a thief and steal my rampion?" she said with angry looks. "It shall be worse for you." "Alas," he answered, "be merciful to me. I am only here from necessity. My wife sees your rampion from the window, and she has such a longing for it that she would die if she could not get some of it." The anger of the witch abated, and she said to him, "If it is as you say, I will allow you to take away with you as much rampion as you like, but on one condition. You must give me the child which your wife is about to bring into the world. I will care for it like a mother, and all will be well with it." In his fear, the man consented to everything, and when the baby was born, the witch appeared, gave it the name of Rapunzel, in parentheses, rampion, and took it away with her. Rapunzel was the most beautiful child under the sun. When she was 12 years old, the witch shut her in a tower which stood in a wood. It had neither staircase nor doors, but only a little window quite high up the wall. Rapunzel had splendid long hair, as fine as spun gold. As soon as she heard the voice of the witch, she unfastened her plaits and twisted her hair round a hook by the window. It fell 20 ells downwards, and the witch climbed up by it. It happened a couple years later that the king's son rode through the forest and came close to the tower. From thence he heard a song so lovely that he stopped to listen. It was Rapunzel who, in her loneliness, made her sweet voice resound to pass the time. The king's son wanted to join her, and he sought for the door of the tower, but there was none to find. He rode home, but the song had touched his heart so deeply that he went into the forest every day to listen to it. Once, when he had hidden behind a tree, he saw a witch come to the tower and call out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Then Rapunzel lowered her plaits of her hair, and the witch climbed up to her. "If that is the ladder by which one ascends," he thought, "I will try my luck myself." And the next day, when it began to grow dark, he went to the tower and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." The hair fell down, and the king's son climbed up it. At first, Rapunzel was terrified, for she had never set eyes on a man before. But the king's son talked to her kindly and told her that his heart had been so deeply touched by her song that he had no peace and was obligated to see her. Then Rapunzel lost her fear, and when he asked if she would have him for her husband, and she saw that he was young and handsome, she thought, "Oh, will he love me better than old Mother Gothel?" So she said yes, and laid her hands on him. She said, "I will gladly go with you, but I do not know how I am to get down from this tower. When you come, will you bring a skein of silk with you every time? I will twist it into a ladder, and when it is long enough, I will descend by it, and you can take me away with you on your horse." She arranged with him that he should come and see her every evening, for the old witch came in the daytime. The witch discovered nothing till suddenly Rapunzel said to her, "Tell me, Mother Gothel, how can it be that you are much heavier to draw up than the young prince who will be here before long?" "Oh, you wicked child, what do you say? I thought I had separated you from all the world, and yet you have deceived me." In her rage, she seized Rapunzel's beautiful hair, twisted it twice round her left hand, snatched up a pair of shears, and cut off the plaits, which fell to the ground. She was so merciless that she took poor Rapunzel away into the wilderness, where she was forced to live in the greatest grief and misery. angry and wicked eyes. "Ah," she cried mockingly, "you have come to fetch your lady love, but the pretty bird is no longer in her nest, and she can sing no more, for the cat has seized her, and it will scratch your own eyes out too. Rapunzel is lost to you. You will never see her again." The prince was beside himself with grief, and in his despair he sprang out of the window. He was not killed, but his eyes were scratched out by the thorns among which he fell. He wandered about blind in the wood and had nothing but roots and berries to eat. He did nothing but weep and lament over the loss of his beloved wife Rapunzel. In this way he wandered about for some years till he reached the wilderness where Rapunzel had been living very sadly in great poverty. He heard a voice which seemed very familiar to him, and he went towards it. Rapunzel knew him at once and fell weeping upon his neck. Two of her tears fell upon his eyes, and they immediately grew quite clear, and he could see as well as ever. He took her to his kingdom, where he was received with joy, and they lived long and happily together. And that was Rapunzel. Let's find another one. Okay, I found one. It's called Briar Rose, or Sleeping Beauty. A long time ago, there lived a king and a queen who said every day, "If only we had a child." But for a long time, they had none. It happened once as the queen was bathing that the frog crept out of the water onto land and said to her, "Your wish should be fulfilled. Before a year has passed, you shall bring a daughter into the world." The frog's words came true. The queen had a little girl who was so beautiful that the king could not contain himself for joy, and he prepared a great feast. He invited his relatives, friends, and acquaintances, and also the fairies, in order that they might be favorably, kindly disposed towards the child. There were 13 of them in the kingdom, but as the king had only 12 golden plates for them to eat from, one of the fairies had to stay at home. A feast was held with all splendor, and when it came to an end, the fairies all presented the child with a magic gift. One gave her virtue, another beauty, a third riches, and so on, with everything in the world that she could wish for. When 11 of the fairies had said their say, the 13th suddenly appeared. She wanted to revenge herself for not having been invited. Without greeting anyone or even glancing at the company, she called out in a loud voice, "The princess shall prick herself with a distaff in her 15th year and shall fall down dead." And without another word, she turned and left the hall. Everyone was terror-stricken, but the 12th fairy, whose wish was still unspoken, stepped forward. She could not cancel the curse, but could only soften it. So she said, "It shall not be death, but a deep sleep lasting 100 years, into which your daughter shall fall." The king was so anxious to guard his dear child from the misfortune that he sent out a command that all the distaffs in the whole kingdom should be burned. As time went on, all the promises of the fairies came true. The princess grew up so beautiful, modest, kind, and clever that everyone who saw her could not but love her. Now it happened that on the very day when she was 15 years old, the king and queen were away from home, and the princess was was left quite alone in the castle. She wandered about over the whole place, looking at rooms and halls as she pleased, and at last she came to an old tower. She ascended a narrow winding staircase and reached a little door. A rusty key was sticking into the lock, and when she turned it, the door flew open. In a little room sat an old woman with a spindle, spinning her flax busily. "Good day, Granny," said the princess. "What are you doing?" "I am spinning," said the old woman, and nodded her head. "What is the thing that whirls around so merrily?" asked the princess. And she took the spindle and tried to spin it too. But she had scarcely touched it before the curse was fulfilled, and she pricked her finger with the spindle. The instant she felt the prick, she fell upon the bed, which was standing near, and lay still in a deep sleep which spread over the castle. The king and queen, who had just come home, had stepped into the hall, went to sleep, and all their counters with them. The horses went to sleep in the stable, the dogs in the yard, the doves on the roof, the flies on the wall. Yes, even the fire flickering on the hearth grew still and went to sleep. And the roast meat stopped crackling. The cook, who was pulling the scullion's hair because he had made some mistake, let him go and went to sleep. The wind dropped, and all the trees in the front of the castle, not a leaf stirred. But round the castle a hedge of briar roses began to grow up. Every year it grew higher, till at last it surrounded the whole castle, so that nothing could be seen of it, not even the flags on the roof. But there was a legend in the land about the lovely sleeping briar rose, as the king's daughter was called. And from time to time princes came and tried to force a way through the hedge into the castle. They found it impossible, for the thorns, as though they had hands, held them fast, and the princes remained caught in them without being able to free themselves, and so they died a miserable death. After many, many years, a prince came again to the country and heard an old man tell of the castle which stood behind the briar hedge, in which a most beautiful maiden called Briar Rose had been asleep for the last 100 years, and with her the king, the queen, and all the courtiers. He knew also from this grandfather that many princes had already come and sought to pierce through the briar hedge, and he remained caught in it and died a sad death. Then the young prince said, "I am not afraid. I am determined to go and look upon the lovely briar rose." The good old man did all his power to dissuade him, and the prince would not listen to his words. Now, however, the 100 years were just ended, and the day had come when Briar Rose was to wake up again. When the prince approached the briar hedge, it was in blossom, and was covered in beautiful large flowers, which made way for him of their own accord, and let him pass unharmed, and then closed up again into a hedge behind him. In the courtyard he saw the horses and bridle hounds lying asleep. On the roof sat the doves with their heads under their wings, and when he went into the house, the flies were asleep on the wall, and near the throne lay the king and the queen. In the kitchen was the cook, with his hands raised as though about to strike the scullion, and the maid sat with the black fowl in her lap, which she had been about to pluck. He went on farther, and all was so still that he could hear his own breathing. At last he reached the touched her. Briar Rose opened her eyes and looked lovingly at him. Then they went down together, and the king woke up, and the queen and all their courtiers, and looked at each other with astonished eyes. The horses in the stable stood up and shook themselves. The hounds leaped about and wagged their tails. The doves on the roof lifted their heads from under their wings, looked around, and flew into the fields. The flies on the wall began to crawl again. The fire in the kitchen roused itself and blazed up and cooked the food. The meat began to crackle, and the cook boxed Scullion's ear to sound that he screamed aloud, while the maid finished plucking the fowl. Then the wedding of the prince and the Briar Rose was celebrated with all splendor, and they lived happily till they died. Oh, my voice is tired now. It's a struggle whispering for that long. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it made you super sleepy. And